Drop is a 2025 American film directed by Christopher Landon and stars Meghann Fahy, Brandon Sklenar, Violet Bean, and Jeffrey Self. On a first date for the first time in years, a widowed single mom receives anonymous threatening messages on her phone about her date. It's a who can you trust, who done it from Blumhouse, and if this is your thing, like 90s style thrillers, you might like this. Now, the funny thing here is I had no interest in seeing this whatsoever. Why, you might ask? I mean, I'm fed up with Blumhouse. I don't want to watch PG-13 movies. I hated the trailer. I'm just tired of Blumhouse's lack of any kind of character development, and I figured I would hate the leads here since most of the film will likely hinge on their performances. I had not seen the Happy Death Day films that Landon directed, but I did see Freaky from 2020, and I did kind of enjoy that, actually. I also found it really interesting when I read that he talked about Drop being kind of like his homage to the Wes Craven film Red Eye. I'm not necessarily a massive fan of that, but I liked Landon's motivation nonetheless. So Meghann Fahy plays Violet, a therapist and single mom, and she decides to date again after the death of her abusive husband. I think it was about a year ago. She's been putting off a date with Henry, played by Brendan Sklenar, for months, but luckily he's a nice, patient guy, and tonight is the night. And I have to say already at this point that I'm starting to be a little bit surprised. The camera work by veteran cinematographer Mark Spicer caught my eye, and the set pieces were cool. They're decent. And Violet arrives a bit before Henry. She's a little early, and she sits at the bar for a drink as she begins receiving digi-drops, like airdrops, I guess, if you have an iPhone from someone in the restaurant. She tells Henry after he arrives, but the messages start to become more ominous, and they are from someone who knows Henry. So yeah, I mean, you're smart. What we have here is a very simple late 90s, early 2000s style thriller, which, haven't really been my thing since the 90s and early 2000s. But for those that might be, this isn't too bad, It's not bad. Essentially, because I'm an atmosphere guy, you get a few different sides here, other than your typical thriller, tension, because there's also a lot of humor here that I didn't expect. It's dare I say, there's a lot of funny parts. So you have like a waiter at this restaurant that I think will kind of divide people, especially those that aren't looking for that kind of thing. I thought he was pretty funny, to be honest. He's super over the top, and I think some people won't really be into it. Maybe they don't want that kind of thing in their thrillers, but I enjoyed this character. I thought it worked just fine. Did they need him? No, he's not very important to the storyline. And there's also quite a bit of emotion here, which probably won't be a surprise. And you might not exactly buy into all of it, but, it's there. And I actually thought it was fairly well done, which kind of segues into the performances and, how I expected them to be bad, like I said earlier, because I'm actually happy to report that they aren't. In fact, they're the opposite. Like I alluded to, the plot really does hinge on the performance of our two leads here. There are a handful of other characters, but the majority of it involves, Violet and Henry. And like I said a million times before, I'm a horror guy, so, I wasn't familiar with Meghann Fahy or Brandon Sklenar, but I left with a positive opinion of both. One thing I did take away from this film was an underlying theme of domestic and emotional abuse, which Violet has a history of, and maybe Henry was drawn to her because he also has a painful past. And this does lead to, some emotional performances from both actors, especially in one scene, which some people might find a bit cheesy, but I think that the actors rose above the script a little bit. I thought that the premise of Violet having to respond to messages about Henry without being able to tell him was, dare I say, a clever touch, at least in the way that they made it work. I actually think that this premise was actually far more interesting than the way that it played out, which, again, still wasn't bad. And, this caused a fair amount of tension, but I have to say that this is where the PG-13 rating, hurt things for me, because in my mind, I just didn't expect anything edgy. It's like, even just walking into this, I knew it would be, it's not necessarily that I knew what it would be, but I knew what it wouldn't be. I think that, filmmakers have came a long way in pushing the limit to what you can do with it, with PG-13, but I still don't want to see it. No watered down shit for me if I can help it. So I'm giving Drop a 5.5 out of 10. It's really solid. Even if it's not my thing, and like I said, it's an ode to the 90s and early 2000s, although less bombastic due to a much smaller budget. Cheers, guys, and I'll see you at the multiplex.